Started. Thank you.
Lovely. Well, as per agenda, we'll start with apologies. I don't think we've got any, have we? I think we're all here, apart from James, who's going to be joining us later. Am I right in thinking that?
No apologies, Chair.
That's lovely. Declarations of interest. Have we got any of those? No?
No.
No, okay then. Right, so that brings us on to minutes of the last meeting, please. Somebody going to present those?
Chair, I have a question on that.
Yeah.
Page 4, second paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
In regards to two.
Do you want to deal with them for accuracy first, Chair? Go through them for accuracy, and then any matters arising you can pick up later.
Yeah, okay, then fair enough then. So could somebody lead with that? I've only got the screen on. Yeah.
Page, when you get to it, Chair, page 6.
Right. Okay, so I'll start with, say, page 1. Is there anything on page 1?
This is accuracy, I take it, Chair.
Yeah.
Okay.
All happy? Page 2. Page 3. And page 4.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Chair,
Matthew and
page 4.
Trevor, you were first though, Trevor. Was it page 4 you wanted to raise something on?
It's a question in regards to that, matters arising from it. So have the minutes been approved?
Not yet, sir, no.
That's okay.
All right, so Matthew, page 4.
Yeah, it's actually page 4, 6, 8. There are 2 Councillor Evanses, and on page 4 it just says Councillor Evans paid tribute. I think that was me. So if we can change that to Councillor M. Evans.
No, I'm disputing that, Matthew.
6. And then on page 8.
I'm sorry.
I'm sure it's the other Councillor Evans.
Well, whoever you're paying tribute to, I will join you enthusiastically in that. Okay.
That's very kind, Chris, and I'm sure we'll agree on most things, but occasionally we might differ. So,
yeah.
So the accuracy for that, and it says they also commented, so it should be he also commented.
Okay, fair enough. Right, so page 5.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I made a comment on that. Councillor Thomas stated that few members of the public understand how the new council processes have changed. It's noticed that ward councillors have had a big increase in inquiries, and a lot of this fed into comments on the process. I don't remember saying it fed into commenting on the processes. Maybe that part of the sentence can be taken out. Which was not open to councillors at this time. That would need to be taken out as well. Comment I made was on our role and the way in which we can complete requests from the public have changed, particularly in the early days of the lockdown.
Right. Okay, we'll note that. Right, where are we now? Page, what is it? So it'll be what, 6 next, will it be?
Oh, sorry, Chair. Can I just mention another word there?
Yeah, carry on.
Why councillors are not completing their role. I think we are completing our role, but why council business is being conducted differently. Is that all right if we change it to that?
All right with me.
That's fine, Chair. We'll make those corrections.
Thank you very much.
Now, where were we? Page 7 is next, I expect. Yeah. Page 8. Anything on page 8? I think that's the end of it, isn't it? There isn't a page 9, or is there?
Yeah, there is.
No page 9.
No, it's no.
No. Okay, so okay, with those amendments, we're all content that that's an accurate record? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Now you wanted to return to something, Trevor, didn't you? At the end of that, once that's been voted as an accurate record.
Yes, I'm happy to with those as a record. Just an update on page 4, paragraph 2.
Yeah.
Have those positions been filled? There's 2 positions vacant at the moment, or was when we had our last meeting. Are those positions now being filled?
I think they're still in the process of. They've certainly been interviewed. That's a scrutiny officer post, yeah?
Yeah, that's correct.
Gareth, would tell us that, I think, what the score is at the moment?
Yes, happy to update on that, Chair. We've interviewed for both jobs. We filled one of the scrutiny advisor post, and we did provisionally appoint to the Democratic Services Manager post. Unfortunately, the person that we appointed subsequently received another job offer from his home authority, so he declined the offer. So at the moment, we've re-advertised the Democratic Services Manager job, and I think the applications are due in by the end of this week. So we'll be shortlisting at the end of this week and conducting remote interviews then as soon as possible. On the scrutiny advisor post, we conducted interviews for both posts before Christmas. We've appointed one of them. I mean, Neil is in attendance at the moment, so Neil was successful in getting one of the scrutiny advisor posts. We decided to re-advertise the other one because we weren't happy with the quality of the shortlisting and the candidates. So, rather than make an appointment, we decided to re-advertise for the second scrutiny post. So that's out to advert again at the moment. The closing date will be the end of this week again, like the Democratic Services Manager post, and we'll be shortlisting for that one very shortly.
So we still got 2 positions which are vacant. One is the Democratic Service Manager and a Scrutiny Manager post.
The Scrutiny Advisor post, yes.
Scrutiny Advisor, sorry. Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Yes. Okay. Right, I think that's it. Does that bring us on to...
Sorry, Charles, can I ask one question?
Yes, Karen, Jason, yeah.
On page 8, I think we raised an issue about if we could have a more in-depth look into barriers from becoming a councillor, especially for people from ethnic minority groups and people with disabilities. But we weren't. I don't think we were clear, or I'm not sure if we actually agreed how that was going to materialise or how we were going to do that. I know you said you were going to take it potentially to the IRP. But I'm just wondering if we actually agree on, because otherwise it'll just sit there, won't it? And we won't actually have anybody specific to action it. So I'm just wondering if we did agree, who would action that?
I don't know that we did.
Sorry, Chair. I mean, just to pick up on Councillor Hughes's point, it was noted there for something to feed back to the IRP. You were meeting with the chair of the Independent Remuneration Panel, and it was one of those factors that you were going to mention at that meeting. I don't think we minuted it on the basis that Democratic Services would look specifically at that issue.
Yeah,
so
I was just wondering who would, Gareth.
That back to the IRP.
Yeah, that's fine. So long as it's that was the actual course of action, the IRP. That's
so I don't
fine.
know if that was done, Chair, if you want to feedback anything to the meeting, that discussion.
Yeah, the first meeting I attended via Zoom, which was about the pay panel effectively. I raised the points, especially Trevor's point about whether or not they were being listened to. And actually, I think Trevor ate on a nerve, really, because I did get I had to convince them that we don't breed shrinking violets in Newport. We say it like it is. But they did say yes, that they are listened to on the point that you raised. They're listened to on a statutory basis, and the sort of structure that they've got apparently is envied by England. They wish that they had the same structure that they got in Wales, and the model that we use is also being copied by the devolved Scottish government. As regards the pay on that one, there was quite a bit of debate about informal arrangements, like if you're paying your sister-in-law to look after the kids or something like that when you're away at the council. These informal ones were problematic, but it doesn't crop up very often, and they were very kind to say that most councillors are very honest and nobody's trying to pull a fast one as regards things that they can get subsidised for. Yeah, the issue about the bars to being a councillor loomed large in the next Zoom meeting that I went to, and there's certainly a big it's a big thing about that. They did say that they were hoping to mentor people into coming in once they come in, but one authority had taken the forward step of mentoring its candidates, and they mentored 53 candidates, so they'd hit the ground running should they be elected. So they'd mentored 53 people, but only 3 of them actually got elected. So it was a lot of time wasted as regards that. Interesting thing from the point of mentoring, one councillor was quite vehement, saying he didn't think that existing councillors should go along to the mentoring sessions, because you get a situation where, as he put it, the last thing we want is a lot of old councillors saying how wonderful they are. It should be something for the new ones coming in, and they preferred a system of buddying up, where you would sort of, terrible term, isn't it? You would buddy up with somebody who got elected at the same time as you. They thought that was more effective. But yeah, so it was given some fair consideration too, and the fact, of course, we are what we are because we're not really making sufficient inroads in contacting those difficult to contact groups. So that was it. Mark, you waved your hand, I think. Mark, you had your hand up.
You're on mute.
I couldn't turn my mute off then. It was something popped up on the screen and it was behind it.
Ah.
Yeah, it was the Jason's point, which I think is completely valid, and I support it. Really, I would have thought would fit into the into the review of the review of the standing orders, in the sense that the Local Government and Elections Wales Act, when we're apparently going to look at that. And I can see that in the paper on page 11 at the top, it refers to a duty to encourage local people to participate in local government decision making, which is in section 39 of the new Act. So it does seem to fit into that framework. So it may be appropriate to sort of look at it either in that context or as a separate item in itself, but also feed into that context. You know, it seems or feed into that discussion. Just a thought, Chair.
Kate, I've got you on the.
Yeah, I actually wanted to make exactly the same point as Mark. I'm sure I didn't manage to peruse the new Act with the understanding and insight which Mark would have brought to it, but I did plough through a fair amount of it. And it seemed to me that this was something which would be addressed within the guidance for the new Act. An awful lot of, and clearly Welsh Government have given thought to the induction and training of members and the areas which new members would find challenging as they got used to actually taking on board the duties of a councillor.
Can I pick up on Kate's point?
Yeah, carry on, Phil.
When we were newly elected, we were called to a meeting with the Welsh Assembly Democratic Services people about 6 months after we'd been elected, to ask what we thought of the training we'd been given, etc., etc. And I think most of it was pretty positive. I don't know who else attended, but we were promised feedback within a relatively short period of time, which never ever came.
I agree.
Yeah, that's bad.
Can I just make one other point as well? That usually when they pass this legislation, and I don't know, there may well be, and Gareth would know the answer to this, but there's usually statutory and or non-statutory guidance. So it may be worth having some guidance when it comes to the point where we're considering this issue, as to whether the issue of accessibility with regard to ethnic and other minority groups is actually dealt with in the statutory and or non-statutory guidance, which is usually published. There's also an explanatory note with the legislation, but that's a different thing really, and that's very limited in scope. It's the statutory and non-statutory guidance which is the important thing.
Right.
I don't know what Gareth's thoughts are on that.
Can I get back in, Jay, just on that?
Yeah.
It's just I agree totally with what Mark said. Really, I think there is scope to look at it under the Act there, but I think it's also probably right that Newport does look at it in more depth, because we are, it's part of that democratic process really, in it to ensure that it's not just about training candidates when they become councillors. It's about how we attract the right calibre of candidates, and candidates that properly reflect democracy and our committee and our communities before they get to that stage. So it's about sort of being as inclusive as we can, and in a very diverse city we've got a great opportunity to try and look at how we do that as well. So I think anything that we can do to help that is going to be useful, I think.
Right, we seem to have drifted into four.
Into respond to Councillor Whitgift, Chair.
Yes, go carry on, please do.
Well, it links into what Councillor Hughes has just said as well. Actually, in terms of the ethnicity and diversity of the council makeup, that's in existing legislation. That goes back to the 2011 measure, because following the previous elections, we had to report back to Welsh Government in terms of the makeup of our council, and there were provisions in that measure to try and encourage more people to come forward in terms of not just the age profile, but diversity of our councillors. So there are measures in place to look at that. There's an item later on in your agenda. We talked about feedback to last induction training, but part of this is actually informing people what it involves to be a councillor, what the responsibilities are, the demands on their time, and how that can be catered for if they need time off from work or they've got other caring responsibilities. So there are lots of things already in place, quite apart from the new Local Government and Elections Act, where we can look at that. I think the difficulty is, I had this conversation with the chair at the briefing, in terms of putting forward candidates for election, a lot of that comes back to the political groups and political parties.
Yeah.
So there's only so much we can do in terms of encouragement, getting people to get involved more, have a better understanding of what happens at local government level. But ultimately, in terms of the makeup of the candidates at election and the council following the election, a lot of that comes back to the political groups as well.
Right. Chris, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I was just about to say exactly, not as eloquently, but what Gareth said. I mean, the barriers to encouraging a diverse group actually comes initially from the two-party system, and introducing some sort of PR into that will have a really, really positive effect, to be totally frank. But surely it would also be sensible to look at things as it stands now. So actually, we had an audit of the position that the council is in now in terms of the demographic breakdowns and ethnic groups and various preferences and so on, to illustrate how diverse the council is now. So we need to know where we are now in order to know where we're going, where we would like to be at the next elections, and that's where you get the cooperation of the parties, surely, and then where you would like to be in by the time of the next elections. You need some sort of roadmap, don't you? Because otherwise it's just rhetoric, and you also need agreement between the 2, 3, 4 main parties, that 5 if you include non-represented parties on the council, that they will agree a criteria for selection but based on attracting diverse groups, because that's the biggest point of influence. So I would strongly suggest an audit of where we are now. It might show up some interesting results, in terms of the whole purpose of the census, the meeting we were in the other day, was to see where we stood as a city and as a nation, as Wales, as the UK now. you know, but we haven't actually had an audit of where the council is now, where the elected representatives lie, and what indeed are their characteristics. So I would suggest perhaps an audit. You know, it could be a open form that's sent to every councillor. Religious beliefs, sexual preferences, etc., and then we might actually see that, you know, we are perhaps ethnic group, what one might identify as, and that would be disabilities. You know, we talk about disabilities, Jason, but you know, there are some unseen disabilities that are recognised, and there may be councillors that have those disabilities, and in a confidential sort of audit of where we are now, that might throw up some sort of interesting data, because you need to know where you are. As I said, to conclude, you need to know where you are, where you would like to go in the short term, and where you want to go in the long term. Anyway, there we are. Cheers.
Chair, could I just come in on this diversity issue? I worked for Avon County Council in the early 90s, and they did a tremendous amount of work in this area to try to encourage ethnic minorities not only to become councillors but to become officers, and they did umpteen surveys to try and find out what their base level was of their existing employees and their existing councillors. And then they rolled out a programme of positively advertising in, should we say, Asian publications, predominantly Irish publications, etc., to try and encourage people to come forward. Now, there were a number of learned papers written at the time, but unfortunately, as you know, Avon County Council was taken apart, and it's gone into 6 district councils now. But I'm sure that the results and the data that they collected and the roadmaps that they put in place are still available to be read if you could find somebody who would be able to research that area of time.
Interesting. I've got Mark, and then I've got Kate. Mark, you first.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think the implication of what Jason said is right, that it is, you know, it's a much wider societal issue, the equalities issues, because we're not talking about one issue, we're talking about a whole series of them, and we're also talking about not just ethnicity, we're talking about other things like Chris has mentioned, like disability and so on and so forth, and sexual orientation, etc. But I think that if we're going to sort of look at that, I think we need a joined up approach. So I think it needs to be linked to some kind of input from the cabinet member for equalities. That's really my thought on it. And also, we did have, although we had quite a good turnout, I recall when I was previously cabinet member for equalities for the training, I think there is still some resistance in some members who think there's just a sort of political correctness issue, and that it's, you know, it's not really it's not really something that they're particularly sympathetic to, but arguably they should do, because really what this is about is making sure that you know, that as a society that we're able to draw on a valuable resource, which is intelligence and ability of various kinds. It has nothing to do with background or ethnicity or anything like that. It's just something which those issues place barriers in the way of, and that's the point. So there may be somebody lurking, as I've said in the past, there may be somebody sort of who is in difficult conditions in some in difficult social circumstances, for example, who has the brilliance to develop, say, a cure for cancer or a virus or something of that kind. Is making sure that we take advantage of that. That's what these barriers That's why these barriers are problematical. Sorry, I sounded a bit incoherent there, but I hope you're getting the message of what I'm trying to say there.
You got your mark.
Yeah. Kate.
So Chair, I'm sorry, Kate, but I'm sort of suggesting an audit of where we are now. I mean, can we agree in principle to that suggestion?
How do we feel? Do we a snapshot of where we are at the moment?
Chair, can I just make the point I was
Over
going
to
to make before, just so that we can think about that into relation to Councillor Chris Evans' question. I'd say the most visible and obvious shortfalls, the one that occurs to me immediately, is that we only have about 30% of females who are elected councillors. And I'm afraid the other one is age. And I hope I won't upset anybody in this particular group, but obviously I'm in the older age group as well. You know, these are very easy to establish, but I do think this can only be addressed by each political group, be it, you know, an official group or you know, some independent would-be representatives, actually canvassing according to their policies on this. Now, it needs to be highlighted. You know, but then the voters can decide actually whether they think that that particular party which they fancy voting for is actually reflecting their views as well, and they feel that the candidates that are put forward by that party will actually represent them appropriately. So I wouldn't say that any sort of solution will be provided to us through having an audit. I think it is down to the individual parties. You know, my own party, the Labour Party, had a long struggle with introducing all women shortlists. There are laws around under which circumstances the Labour Party can do this, but the Labour Party are committed to it and have delivered it. But, you know, if we still...
Oh dear, losing you, Kate. Sorry, Kate, I can't hear you. Sorry, didn't get the last couple of sentences, Kate.
I said, you know, if we have these, sorry, my screen's frozen and I've got that sign up again, bad network quality. Yeah. I think that all political parties or individuals considering standing as candidates need to get serious about how they're going to address this and actually highlight the fact to people who may potentially vote for them that they do think this is a serious issue, because we need to find candidates who our voters believe will represent their interests in the way which...
Yeah. You've gone again, Kate. Sorry, Kate, I'm not getting any of that.
Shall we give up for the moment, because my so bad?
Yeah, got that clear. Yeah, effectively, what you're saying, you would shove the onus onto the political parties to come up with a more balanced choice of candidates.
Absolutely, because, you know, we have a response. Our parties or our, you know, be we independent or actually in a recognised party, we have got a responsibility to highlight this as an issue, which is one factor which voters should be casting their votes on, because it's a question of quality of representation, whether you're getting people who you trust and believe will understand our voters' points of view when it comes to representing them in the council or parliament or any other body.
Right, got all that clearly. Okay. Trevor, did you have your hand up, or were you adjusting something?
No, I didn't have my hand up.
Chair,
that's fair enough.
To come back on Kate's point there, that merely perpetuates the system, and, you know, all parties have been, I think, have encouraged diversity, but surely it would be better in Newport for the parties to agree a way of the council attracting different people via seminars or perhaps or online thing, a fast track from something like the Youth Council to representation, a fast track from BMA groups to representation. We've got it there. So if all the parties were, because it can't be political, can it? If it's a council initiative, then it can't be political. So if all the parties were to agree, and this is what this Democratic Services Committee is about, a way forward, or potentially, it's great that we're actually discussing something of substance, then the council can enact that, you know. And like, I really don't understand how, you know, I respect Kate's view, but how can we know where we're going if we don't know where we are? I mean, that's like, you know, the basis of any roadmap is to assess where you are, know where you want to go, and then the steps towards that. I mean, that's just, you know, pretty basic, really. And if you don't know where you are, it might not take long to count how many people are from a particular ethnic group or the age of people. But as regards some underlying trends, disability, sexual preferences, etc., then that might be interesting. And then we can agree as a group as to where we want to be, you know, and this is all worthy, good stuff, you know. But yeah, it shouldn't solely be left to the political parties, because then it's pointless having this meeting, because what we're trying to do is discuss what the council can do in order to facilitate a greater recruitment process from a non-political basis.
Chair, interesting as this discussion is, I'm struggling to find where it is on the agenda. Now, if this is something we want to discuss, fine, but let's have it as an agenda item at some stage in the future, please, so we can adequately prepare for what we may or may not want to say on the subject.
Right. I got Kate. Did you want to respond, Trevor?
Only that I don't believe other political parties have a coherent policy on the recruitment of diverse members of society as councillors. Sorry,
okay,
Chris.
But that's fine, Kate, but you have to know what you're basing that on. Is that just an opinion?
Well, I'm sorry, I haven't gone into every political party.
So then your logic is flawed.
But I know what the Labour Party policy is.
Yeah, so then your logic is flawed. Yeah, because you don't know. So what I'm saying is that we need to know. Yeah, it's like, you know, it's common sense. Okay.
I look forward to seeing your parties. You know, you're a properly constituted party within Newport. I really look forward to seeing your policy prior to the next local government election.
Well, you know, a lot can happen between now and sort of future elections, Kate. And I would say that we've got a third of our councillors are actually female. We represent really diverse groups. Which will probably be thrown up in that survey that I'm suggesting, but it's not a political point, surely, you know.
Well, I do think it's political, because this is the basis on which we're elected as councillors. I don't think we can get away from this.
No, but but we're talking about the council and a strategy to attract more people from diverse backgrounds, and you need to know where you are to know where you're going, surely.
Chair, I don't know how long do you want to continue this?
Well, as long as you keep coming back, Kate, I'll keep, you know.
Ever after you, because you've been very patient.
Yeah, I understand what Councillor Chris Evans is saying, and Kate, but the question I want to do is to give it to Gareth Price. Can Newport City Council legislate for this type of thing?
No, that was the point I was making. There's a limit to what the council can do, and obviously we can put in place all those mechanisms to encourage people to come forward, and to avoid any obstacles to people standing as elected members. But ultimately, we can't control who's voted in at the ballot box.
Yeah, absolutely.
So whatever audit we carry out now, wherever we're starting from, we don't have the power to deliver any outcome.
No. Okay, lovely. Thank you, Gareth.
Right. Well, personally, I thought we'd sort of strayed into the review of standing orders. This was sort of linked into sort of facets and themes of it, but there we are. So how do we proceed? Do you want to go from the review of standing orders right from the start, or should we proceed on? What? Can somebody present the review of standing orders, basically?
Sorry, Chair. This is the referral back from council last time.
Yeah.
If you remember, you know, there was a motion moved at council to lengthen the time allowed for leaders' question time. But there was an amendment that was carried at the meeting which referred the matter back to this committee, so you could look at that in the round, as well as a review of other standing orders in the light of the local government and elections legislation. So this report really is just a start of a 10, and is saying to the committee, how do you want to deal with this?
Chair, can I come in on this, please? It seems to me that this review of standing orders is a two-part report. The first being the motion of the 26th of January that was passed in council and referred back to us. And the second, the Local Government Elections Act Wales 2021. So they seem to be two entirely separate things. So could I ask you how you intend to deal with those issues? Because are we to accept or reject all of it, or accept or reject none of it? You know?
Well, from my understanding, the $64 question seems to be, are we content as a committee to carry on for the review of standing orders and come up with some decision about the length of time that the leader would be there to take questions, or would we want to sort of defer it until it's linked with the new framework for the Welsh government? So it's either do we keep it at our own local level, or do we sort of push it back until we've had further information from Welsh government? I think it's a matter of personal, maybe political opinion, whether or not we do deal with this on our own. Matthew Evans.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Well, the answer to do we kick it into the long grass, the answer should be no, because if we're going to make progress, then we need to start doing things now. Without going back to the original motion, the intention is to allow backbenchers the opportunity and an extra 15 minutes, which I think is something we could recommend for the benefit of all political parties. Clearly, it's not enough time. A number of my group have not been able to ask questions. I appreciate we only have about 6 on there, but they've been up to 9 of them wanting to ask questions. So up to 9 people in total, and they're never going to get the opportunity to ask the questions. So from the initial point of view, if we recommended it was increased by 15 minutes now, this wouldn't happen till after the next council meeting. And as I understand it, I'm not sure whether our meeting on the late April's been cancelled. So if the late April one's been cancelled, then it wouldn't actually come in till July, which would give us about 8 or 9 months before the next elections. And also the business about public participation. You know, why do we have to wait for further local? I'm sure there are other councils where we can get some advice from who actually encourage people to petition, to ask questions. You know, it's good for democracy. We should be doing it now. We can't wait forever, because the next time we meet, you know, we'll be talking about it'll be too close to the elections and we won't be able to do it in any case. So I think we just need to grab the bull by the horns and go ahead. And there was other parts in here about protocols for remote attendance. Now, you know, I'm not too concerned about that. We seem to have managed so far with protocols. But again, if we're going to do something, why do we have to wait? We just need to get on and agree now.
Thank you. I've got Mark and then I've got Trevor. So Mark first, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to sort of put my sort of pompous lawyer's hat on and say that I think we need to look at the resolution as passed, and we need to follow the instructions that we were given by the council in that resolution, and what it says in the actual resolution itself, which is at the very end, is the last 3 lines. This council resolves that the Democratic Services Committee review both impacts the Local Government and Elections Wales Act 2021 and any proposed changes to the standing orders together in line with the work plan of the said committee within their normal reporting to full council. So it's perfectly clear from that. You have to look at the intention behind the resolution and the actual wording of it, the literal interpretation on the basis, on the face of the resolution, is that we consider the two together and at the same time. I mean, that's perfectly clear. So we can't sort of go off on a frolic of our own and do whatever we want with it. We have to deal with it in the same piece of work. That's what that resolution means. There are people here who drafted that resolution, so I don't know whether if they have any idea whether they agree with me on that point, but that's the way that I would suggest that we should see it. Really, it's not up to us to put our own gloss on it or to sort of ride our particular hobby horse. That is the will of council.
Thank you, Trevor, and then after that, Chris, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. I'm of the same mind as Councillor Whitcott. We should look at it together in regards to the Local Government and Elections Act in 2021. And if you go to page 39, where's that gone now? 39, which is the Act, or working together to support councils on local democracy. It is actually been passed by the Royal Assent, and there are training dates set aside for councillors on the 26th of February between 11 and 1. What I'd like to know of Gareth, or if he's aware of it, has this been passed by Welsh Government, or is it statutory from Westminster?
So the legislation has been passed. It was passed in January. What page 39 is a different issue. This is a governance handbook that the WLGA are looking to produce for councillors. Just to explain in simple terms how governance arrangements work. This doesn't impact on standing orders, and it's not directly related to the legislation, although it will pick up some of the changes since the handbook was last produced. So this is a separate issue, but the legislation has been enacted. It will come into force in stages based on implementation and secondary regulations, and we will get guidance on various aspects of the legislation as it's enacted. So there will be a need to review standing orders generally because of the changes that we know are coming. The guidance hasn't been introduced yet, and we've highlighted in this report some of the issues that this committee will need to look at, particularly in terms of public engagement, public participation, how we deal with petitions and so on. So, and I think that was the intention of the council resolution, to say that you can't just look at one part of the standing orders in isolation. You need to look at this whole thing in the round, because we will need to make more substantive changes just to accommodate the legislation. And those changes will need to be in force before May 2022. Yeah. So, I mean, we'll pick this up on the work programme, but coming back to Councillor Sir Matthew Evans' point about how often this committee meets, it may well be that you will have to meet far more often than your scheduled meetings, almost as some sort of working party, if you like, to look at the changes brought about by the legislation and the guidance to make sure that we've got all those measures in place before May 2022.
This is why I was supporting Councillor Whitcott in regards to that. We need to look at it as a whole, not as two separate issues. I don't see the point in dealing with one part now, and then when the main legislation comes into force, we have to change it all again. So, in my opinion, I'm quite happy to go with Councillor Whitcott on that.
Right. Now I've got Chris, and then I've got Jason, and then after that I got Mark. So I think I got the running order right. So
Cheers.
yeah, so it's yeah, Chris Evans first, please.
Cheers, Chair. And we did have quite a big sort of debate conversation, didn't we, at full council? And as keen as I am being perhaps the person who actually got questions originally in council during this term agreed, for the sake of waiting for a short period of time, we can have a great deal of sensible change and much needed change. So as keen as I am to say yes, this committee recommends sort of an extra 50 minutes, an extra half an hour. I'm sure Matt and I'm sure Jane, the leader, and Kevin would stay there all night to ask and answer questions. And I think weaponizing it is actually, a little bit of a false move. We've got a great opportunity to reform. It's a shame that we're being forced to do that, I have to say, from my personal perspective, by Welsh Government legislation, but it ain't going to take long. And, this committee, as opposed to, despite our best efforts, just rubber stamping and meeting every now and again for a little chat, really has an opportunity to have some positive impact on future councils. And so as keen as I am to see sensible democratic change, public involvement, good grief, I remember people laughing at me when in the past I've suggested public questions of full council. Nobody here, but there were members that laughed at me. But we possibly can have that in the future, but it needs to be done properly and integrated into the standing order. So as much as I respect Matt's point, I think we need to wait for a matter of months and do it properly.
Right, fine. Now we got Jason as well, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I was one of the ones, obviously, that suggested the amendment in full council, and Gareth has actually put it absolutely, he's nailed it really, in the sense that that's exactly why the amendment was put in there. It's more than just a singular issue, and I'm sure that there are positive motivations about extending the questions to leader, but we do need to know exactly what Chris has been saying now. Really, we do need to know how it works in the bigger picture. And we've got a really strong opportunity here to look at things in much more depth and look at things properly, look at how it all ties in with the changes that are happening anyway. And we can come out to this with something really positive certainly for the next group, maybe for this group, but certainly for the next group, so that they can actually, I can really see it enhancing democracy in Newport. And I totally sort of understand some of the frustrations that will cause about wanting to progress quickly. But sometimes progressing quickly isn't going to get you the best sort of solution. I think, where we're at now is actually about having a proper, really in-depth look about how we progress this. And I think we have the framework, as Gareth has said, we have the framework to do that coming up under the new guidance. And I think that's the way we should progress.
Thank you. Phil, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Could we just reflect on the way the present question system is working in the council? And Chris, I hadn't realised that you'd been an advocate for questions in the council. I thought it was brought in by Baroness Wilcox at after the last Hastings meetings, where she agreed this on an open platform.
I think the Baroness acknowledged in full council that came from a prompt by myself. If you watch the, not that it matters, it's a great thing, and I'm quite willing for the Baroness to take credit, but I'm bow to her.
Well, can we look at the way that it's panning out at the moment? Yeah. I think if opposition leaders actually limited themselves to questions, then 15 minutes would probably be accurate. But there's a great deal of playing to the gallery at this question time, and maybe it's the only opportunity they get, and it's a reasonable thing for them to do. But there are ample opportunities for all members to have their questions answered by the open questions forum. And I believe, and I stand again to be corrected, that that's working pretty well. And if any member wants a question answered, they just write in. They'll get an answer within hopefully a short period of time. One of the guiding principles of chairing any meeting is to curb the verbose and to encourage the hesitant. And I don't really see that happening when members are, again, rather playing to the cameras. And I don't believe any extension of the question time will do anything to actually achieve this. It will only result in members trying to electioneer for themselves in this very short period before the next set of elections. I've personally seen such systems operate in councils in England, and outside in another meeting I did talk to Gareth about it when we were first brought up as standards. And again, it's done nothing at all to enhance the reputation of the council concerned or aid any form of democracy. I therefore believe that the extension of time for questions should be left until the next council for them to decide on that. And I would make one point, if I might, on the Wales Act. The last point, the remote attendance. Again, I've got a lot of reservations about this one. I can see how they'll work in the rural areas of Wales where, you know, councillors may have to travel 50 miles each way to attend a meeting, where obviously there's a lot of scope for a better way of communicating. But in a fairly geographically small council like Newport, where I think the most distance any of us have to travel is about 10 miles, it really isn't appropriate. I find it's dehumanising the council, these remote meetings, and I don't see it's doing anything at all to actually aid debate and democracy. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah, I must admit, personally, I concur with your last comments there, Phil. I think, you know, the cruelest thing you can do to a human being is to put it in solitary confinement, isn't it? We're gregarious by nature, and as regards all what we're going through at the moment, yes, we can do it, but I'm just adding a personal opinion. I don't think it's healthy, and the sooner we can go back to what we used to do, in my book, the better. But still, nonetheless, that's my own two bobs worth. Matthew, you had a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, Phil's just let the cat out of the bag now. Kick it into the long grass. Wait till after the May 2022 elections, and we can they can sort it out then. You know, I'm sorry, we're talking about a small thing. If you're a backbencher from another political party, I think you'd be frustrated that you haven't got the opportunity. The 15 minutes. I mean, we've started with the council meetings now. Well, we must have a lesson from the leader of the council, which goes on for about 10-15 minutes, which never used to happen. A sort of party political broadcast. Then we have one question from myself, from the leader of the independent group. The Lib Dem leader didn't even have an opportunity to ask a question there. And so as far as backbenchers go, there is no opportunity in a public forum where the public can watch these debates. It's a simple thing. Standing orders can be changed instantly with a recommendation, but clearly there's no appetite among the ruling group to do this. That's understandable. But, you know, I guess I've been getting a bit cynical in my old age, because clearly the resolution was designed to ensure that everything was kicked into long grass. And reality is we'll get to Christmas time and then it'll be, okay, well, yeah, we'll have a look at this. Yeah, we'll have a meeting in February. Oh, but next time it's too late. We're going to get ready for the elections in May. You know, that's a decision you're entitled to make. We live in a democracy. You know, it may well be the case after the elections that the Labour Party are the biggest group, and then all of a sudden, guess who'll be standing, putting their hands up and saying we want to ask questions to the leader of the council. And as far as the public engagement goes, surely there are good best practice around the UK, which we can look at, you know, rapidly, rather than taking months and months and months and months and months. There must be best practice around the UK where you have public engagement. I'm all in favour of it. Opening the council meetings up, allowing petitions and allowing members of the public to speak. You know, we're talking earlier about how we try and attract councillors and things like that. Then this is a perfect opportunity to get young people to be able to ask questions at council, to get people from diverse backgrounds to ask questions. So why are we going to take so long over this when we could actually make a start now? Because anything we do now, as I said, I don't even know if the council meeting is going ahead in April, but we're looking at June, July before any recommendations. We'll be looking at Christmas time at the earliest. So all I'm saying is, you know, if you want to wait, fine. Can't we actually start making some progress and get on with it now rather than later?
I think James.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I just want to pick Matthew up on a few things there, sort of saying that Phil had let the cat out of the bag. That's just Phil's opinion, as far as I know. He was just giving his opinion, which is what I thought this was about. In regard to saying that, I think you said the Lib Dems couldn't ask a question. If I recall, and I could be wrong, Matthew, so correct me if I'm wrong. Actually, it was your deputy leader, Councillor Routley, who actually got his timing wrong, and she could actually ask a question. So I think the point being here, I don't think it's Phil's opinion. I think Chris Evans made it clear, and Jason, that Gareth has sort of said, you know, the guidelines will be coming out. You know, you have to wait for the guidelines. Not just in this scenario. I think in any scenario you're in, you'd wait for the guidelines to come out and then look at it then. And I think as a whole, you don't pick and choose little bits until it all comes out. And I think Trevor touched on it. You know, we don't want to do something and have to go back because all of a sudden the guidelines sort of mention something else. So I think sort of for my side, and you know, and I love this committee, and if we have to meet more, so be it, to discuss further. But I just want to clear up a couple of matters there, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Mark, over to you, I believe.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just go back to my previous point and to Gareth. So two things, really. The first thing is that the council resolution has clearly spelt out what is expected of the committee, which is to deal with the whole of the issue, which is what I said previously, and I believe that Gareth confirmed that particular point. Well, the second point is really, it doesn't really make any difference at this point what we as individuals think, and I don't mean that in any disrespect to colleagues on the committee. The question is, what's that noise? Sorry. The question is really, how do we implement what the council has decided? And the council has decided it, and we can't just tear it up, as I said previously, and decide to do what we want. We have to consider it in that context. So I just think that our job this morning is to say, yes, we accept the instructions from council. So I'm going to move this, that we accept the instructions from council, and that that we consider all of these matters as part of the same exercise, because that's what the resolution said, and I don't think we've got any alternative but to accept that. So that's what I move, Chair.
Right.
Second that, Chair.
Second. Okay, do we take a vote on that? Gosh, how are we going to do that? All those in favour of the motion, I should assume if you raise your hands, perhaps that's the best bet. Have I got everybody? What about you? Is that you, Chris? You just vote for? But I think the motion is more or less carried, I think, by and large. Yeah, there we are. Right, so I think we can conclude the conversation on that. Chris, you had a comment, but I should imagine if it was on this, we'll knock it on the head, yeah?
Yeah, we can knock it on the head. Yeah, because
okay.
We've had a vote now, haven't we? So
yeah, we have. So that's done and dusted. Right.
Chair, can I ask for some clarification?
Sorry, yes, certainly.
Okay, so where do we go from here?
We review the situation when it all comes together.
Yeah, do we have a time scale, please?
When we get the clear. So
can I suggest that in terms of the review of standing orders, We wait the guidance on public participation and engagement. That's not to say in the meantime, if councillors have any views about how the process in council could be changed for the better, that you can't bring forward suggestions as part of that review process. And yes, we can start doing some background research, as Councillor Matthew Evans has suggested, in terms of how many councils have public questions at council or other meetings. Yeah. So we can start that process and bring back some information to you. But I would suggest that we don't make a final decision on where we go with council standing orders until we've had the guidance on, particularly on public participation and possibly on petitions as well, because you might want to make some provision in council for how you handle public petitions as well. So we can certainly start the work. We're not suggesting we kick this into the long grass at all. We need to start work on this quickly, but I don't think we can conclude any process until we've had the Welsh Government guidance to make sure that whatever we introduce complies with that statutory guidance.
I agree.
Thanks, Gareth. Thanks, Chair.
Right. Could I just ask Gareth a question on the petition side of it? I think we've got a process for accepting petitions at the moment, but I'm not clear on what it is.
It gets lost, doesn't it?
The petitions,
yeah,
we
just
did some work on this.
Yeah, it's just a process that they're no longer presented to the Mayor and Council. Mm-hmm. There's no formal process about how they're dealt with. So at the moment, they are just received informally and passed either to the relevant head of service or cabinet member, and it's left to them in terms of how they respond. Now, other councils, and this is probably where the legislation will require us to go, will have some sort of process for electronic submission of petitions, a bit like the Welsh Assembly and the national government, and a procedure as to how they are debated. And one of the issues is, you know, if you've got so many signatories to a petition, whether that is something that should at least be debated in council rather than just sent to a cabinet member or head of service. So I think it's that sort of process that we need to develop. At the moment, all we've got is a practical procedure in terms of how we receive them and how we respond.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. No.
Can I just check something there, Jay? It might be naivety on my part, but we haven't read the documentation. I'm coming back to Gareth there. Gareth, you said guidance and then I think legislation. So obviously guidance is a framework that you may choose to adopt or not. Legislation is legislation. You have to adapt it. So just for clarity for anybody that might watch this, I totally endorse everything that you say. Yeah. Yeah.
This is not discretionary guidance. Sorry. The legislation.
Guidance.
You look at the provisions in the legislation. Yeah. That's now been enacted, yeah, but so it's just a framework. It's just a requirement for the council to have, for example, a public engagement strategy. Yeah. Now, what the legislation doesn't go into detail on is what that strategy must encompass. So that's where the guidance comes in. Now, it may well be that the guidance will also give you flexibility and discretion, but that will be statutory. We have to have regard to that guidance. We can't ignore it. So that's why, I mean, we need to see the guidance first before we develop the council's own local sort of participation public engagement strategy.
Thank you, Gareth. So it is statutory, because if we were to kick it into the long grass, I wouldn't be very keen on that. But I would be totally opposed to it. But we can't, because it's going to be statutory and provide us with a framework. Yeah, just in case anybody refers to this later. Yeah.
Yeah, it's already a statutory requirement. We need the legislation, the statutory guidance then to explain how we implement it. And it has to be up and running by May 2022. So there's a specific timetable for implementation.
Okay, thank you, Gareth.
So we can't kick it into the long grass, basically.
No.
Okay. Right, now I think that's more or less dealt with item 4 completely, unless anybody else can think of anything. Am I right in thinking that, Mr. Price?
Yes, that's fine for the time being, Chair. We'll bring it back with further information once we've got a timetable for the guidance and implementation.
Lovely. Thanks very much. Right, now item 5, competency framework and induction training. Would you like to outline that first, please?
Thanks, Chair. Again, this is something that was raised at a meeting I think you were due to attend in terms of meetings with WLGA and other local government democracy chairs.
Yeah.
Again, it's preparation really for the next local government elections. And what they're trying to develop is an update in terms of the competency framework for councillors, and it comes back to what we said earlier about explaining to people what the role of councillor really entails, so people can understand before they stand in elections what that entails. So it's outlining what roles and responsibilities each particular member has, both in relation to your representational role as a ward councillor and then specific roles on the council, whether it's on planning committee or as a member of cabinet and so, or chair of democratic services committee. So there are particular skill sets that we've got there. This links into obviously member training and development as well, and also the role descriptions that we've now approved as a council that form part of the constitution. So that effectively it's like job descriptions for elected members, and with skill sets for particular roles and responsibilities. So that's the first part of this. Appendix 1 is that revised competency framework, and the Welsh Local Government Association sort of put it out there for comment really, in terms of whether elected members have any views on what's in that competency framework. So that's the first thing that they're asking for views on. The second part of this report, Appendix 2, is the proposed programme for induction training following the next local government elections. It goes back to what Councillor Horan said last time about the induction training. Now this is obviously belatedly your chance to feed back in terms of the quality of that training last time and how you think it can be improved next time. So this is the sort of the post-election sort of first few weeks induction training programme for new members, and it covers all the basic essentials in terms of what it entails to be a councillor, going down to specific training then on things like codes of conduct, licensing and planning. And as you'll see, most of the training now, they're looking to deliver by way of e-training and remote training modules. So again, that's being developed by particular councils, and as those training modules are developed, we'll give you further information. I think arising from that meeting, there were some specific questions that were put to you as chairs of democratic services, particularly in terms of this e-learning platform. Those questions are set out in the report really. So the second part we're asking committee to consider are those particular questions raised by the WLGA, and how effective you think the current e-learning modules are, and whether you've got any comments on that part of the training. So that in essence is what's before you, whether you've got any comments on those two draft documents, and specifically whether you've got any comments on those e-learning modules.
Mm-hmm. I thought the frameworks definitely seem to dot every I and cross every T, and I wonder people, if you were to show that to a candidate, would you scare them off? You know, there we are. There we are. But on the other hand, there's nothing there you could take issue with. It's sensibly put. And I think, as Benny Hill once put it, a privileged glimpse of the blinking obvious, but still there we are. Comments, please. Kate.
Thank you, Chair. Let's hope the connection lasts this time. I'd just like to say that seems to be extremely comprehensive. I'd struggle to see anything which they'd missed off in that actually at the moment, just on an initial look at it. I'd like to say, you know, I'm in my second term as an elected member. As the years have gone on, things have improved considerably. And it seems when I was first elected, you know, it's a very confusing process. It's a bit like what they say about having a baby. You know all these other people have gone through it before, but no one can actually describe it in such vivid detail that you really believe what it's going to be like. But, you know, certainly more effort, more constructive thought has been put in as the years have gone by into preparing councillors to do the best job they can. So, yes, I welcome this. I mean, how long it will take, how many hours of training this involves, you know, the length of that list might put some people off, but I think it's a move in the right direction.
Right. Pardon me, I think I might have gone out of turn here. Should I have asked Neil to introduce that last item, Gareth?
No, that's fine. You carry on, Chair.
Okay, no offence meant to Neil. There we are. Jason, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Thomas, I agree it's a really comprehensive piece of work, really, and I think, you know, it'd be useful. I think that's part of what we were talking about earlier. It'd be useful for potential candidates to see that, because it's almost a job description, isn't it? To it is a job description of what the job entails. I think it'd be really useful if I'd seen that. I'm not sure if it would put me off, but it would have been something useful piece of. But what I would like to sort of do, if I could, is one thing. Not that it's missing there, because I know it's not part of that, but I'd just like to sort of, for me as a new councillor coming in the last election, I think one of the most important things to me really has been the role of the Democratic Services team itself, supporting, training, preparing us, advising us, you know. And I think, you know, there's a really, it's about reflecting really on the really important stuff that they do and the support they give us, and how they give that support in a really sort of supportive way, I guess is the way, isn't it? And I think it's just acknowledging that role. I would, looking at the e-learning, the only thing I'd sort of say about that really is it's about making sure that as we progress into a more sort of IT sort of way of doing things, that we actually facilitate people that might have difficulties in that sort of more adequately. So people with visual or hearing impairments, or people just find IT difficult because of issues such as dyslexia and stuff. So as long as we cover that sort of spectrum as well, then you know, just to keep that high up on the agenda, really. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah. Very valid point, Jason. In the meeting which Mr. Price alluded to, that was one of the main sort of points of debate. Are we heading to a situation where computer literacy is a requirement of candidates? Who, of course, you couldn't say that, but it seems to be heading in that direction. But there we are. Right. So then I've got Matthew next, and then Trevor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I agree with Jason on that last point. When we're looking at e-learning platforms, I know I'm not the only one who's struggling when we've had these links for things like the carer or safeguarding training online. It should be relatively simple for people to do it in the first place. But similarly, I'm not convinced it's the best way forward. We've covered everything by the kitchen sink on this. I mean, it's an obscene amount of information, and you expect any new councillor, we talk about encouraging people to sound. If I looked at those 37 modules and said you've got to do that, it's a nonsense. You know, we've got to be realistic. We've got to think of their welfare, and if we do want to encourage people, those can be streamlined down so into 1 hour modules covering several of those, rather than different modules for different things. So I do worry that if you want to encourage a young person to come in there, here's 37 modules of training or whatever, it's a nonsense. It's far too much. They'll have enough to deal with as it is. They can be covered in a better way. And similarly about what Phil's talking about, e-learning. Now, when you're in a seminar in a building, you've got other people you can chat to and talk to and ask questions, then that's very important. And that's another why where I think we shouldn't necessarily be talking about looking at online training all the time, because you can learn so much more from other people and talking to other people, and questions people one might ask in seminars. So I don't want to sound like a traditionalist, because actually I think it's a better way of dealing with it. And you know, we've got just vast information here, and I think we need to recommend streamlining that to ensure that the well-being of future councillors is taken into consideration.
Good points. Trevor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree to a certain extent with Councillor Matthew Evans, but I do, and I have concerns in regards to e-learning. For a start, we've had no end of trouble already today with Councillor Kate Thomas in regards to fading out and fading in, and the IT situation.
Always trouble, Kate, you are.
Oh.
But, you know, there's a number of places around Newport that haven't got that connectivity, and we have to consider that. Until such times that we do get that, then I don't know what to do in regards to that. But agreed with Councillor Matthew Evans in regards to the volume of training that they're anticipating. If I'd have known that before I started, I would have pulled out, to be quite honest. But at the end of the day, a lot of people, a lot of, I'm going to say, mature councillors can possibly buddy up with the newcomers coming in and give them some sort of training in regards to asking questions, how to do it, or even get somebody else to answer the questions which they want. So it's a draft report. I will be commenting on it, but I see a great deal we can do. It's e-learning, and it's through, I believe it's through Welsh Government. So I think that's the way they will go in the end. It'll be, I don't know whether it's cost effective, whether the council got to pay for this, or it's free to all councillors which will be elected in May 2022. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, but again, showing my own observations I think we could think of certain councillors who've never touched IT, but it hasn't stopped them from being excellent spokesmen for their own community and excellent representatives. So, you know, I think we can be too easily seduced by this contact via IT. You know, it's we are after all people persons, and yeah, you know how good we are on the street and represented in council. It's something we shouldn't forget. But that's my own observation. Chris, over to you. Your mic's on, mate. Can't hear you, Chris. Your mic's on. Here we are. Yeah.
You're on mute, as they say, isn't it? There's my IT skills showing up. I mean, democracy is a wonderful thing. It's the Democratic Services Committee, and the very essence of democracy is that it shouldn't be restrictive to people's standing, which is what we've talked about. And you know, the fact that, you know, the people that I've met since becoming the councillor that might not be that IT literate, but have an incredible network that post-COVID people would knock on their doors with problems, you know. So whilst it's a burden, that it's perhaps the one thing that you can get involved in without any qualifications. You know, one of the most interesting people I know is a builder that's has made rather a lot of money, but really sort of philanthropist as well. And, you know, we can't read and write. So if there were some barriers to becoming the trade, that mandatory barriers, then perhaps he might never have been able to donate to the level that he does to good causes. One of the most interesting women that I know has an incredible network of people, but merely does not respond well to the whole IT thing. So I think often academics and perhaps officers go off on this tangent, trainers of e-learning and so on. The reality is, you know, I get the e-learning in work, and I often run it, go and make a cup of tea, and then sort of do the quiz at the end. I tell the truth. This is what I do. I do the quiz at the end, and it might take me half an hour to do the quiz, and then I'll make notes of the answers that I didn't get right and then try to alter it. So, you know, I think it should be a structure to help and support. And wow, this is a structure. It's one heck of a structure. But when we start talking about it being mandatory, I think I would be very cautious about that. I think I would be very cautious about the fact that it might exclude people. And if somebody chooses not to do that, but when they're able to, they choose to knock on somebody's door and have a conversation about their problems, then I think that's equally as valid as merely ticking a box. And because sometimes we get obsessed with the academia stuff, and the solutions are quite easy. They're there in front of us, you know, and that goes back to the diversity thing. I think we have to be careful with languages. I mean, if we're going to do it, the gross assumption that everything's going to be in English, you know, definitely Welsh, but what about Polish, a lot, or Eastern European, and some of the Asian languages, you know? So that's why you need that democratic study. So it's not as simple as it's laid out, but we should never exclude people that choose not to do it. You know, and it's for the electorate to decide then as to whether, when they stand for election, as to whether they would like them to continue with that, you know. And, you know, the fact that somebody has chosen not to do something and it becomes mandatory, I mean, what systems and controls are you going to have if somebody doesn't do it? Are they going to be called to standards for not doing an hour course? You know, I think, you know, it seems good on the surface. Yes, OK, let's go with it, but let's feed back some of those comments that other members and I have tried to make, you know, and never discount somebody that isn't computer literate. You know, you do that. I think we do that at our peril, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Mark?
I suppose the way that you could approach it is to close it down to a number of sort of core modules, and you know, some kind of assessment could be undertaken by, I don't know whether it would be this committee or whoever, to identify what the real core things, the basics that a person has to undertake in order to be a competent counsellor. So you might sort of narrow it down to, I don't know, 3 or 4 or something like that issues or core modules, and then the others. You could say that that best practice is to take part in the following of the remaining modules, so that you at least then have core competencies that the person.
Losing you, Mark.
It's just my thought on the issue.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I think, Mr. Price, we do have a similar situation at the moment, don't we, where certain training lectures were considered mandatory, casting my mind back to when I first joined.
Yeah, that's correct, Jeremy. Coming back to Councillor Evans' point and the point about this not being onerous, not all of those programmes are mandatory. And this comes back to the provision in the legislation about individual training and development plans for members. So your particular training is tailored to your needs. So a lot of those courses are optional. The only mandatory ones really are a code of conduct, which is mandatory. All councillors have to sign up to that, so you have to undertake code of conduct training. And as a council, we say licensing and planning training is mandatory. And if you don't undertake the training, you're not qualified to sit on those committees. But the rest of those programs are entirely voluntary and discretionary.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Gareth, what I was saying was I would never want to see some of those things become mandatory. That was the point that I was trying to make, but just for clarification, yeah.
And that's not the purpose of this training, Chair. It's to help members discharge their roles. It's not to put people off or to impose something on members that's unduly onerous. So it's really up to members how many of these programs that they want to take advantage of. So that was the first thing. In terms of those who aren't completely IT literate, well, again, that's part of the work that Anne's team and the governance team do in your first week. Is actually to sit down with members and make sure that they can use their laptops and devices and you can access your emails and so on. So again, you know, we tailor that training specifically to the requirements of individuals. You know, and I'm sure Anne and Neil will tell you there are some councillors, you know, literally they had to sit down with and show them, you know, step by step how to operate their devices. Other councillors are far more IT literate, and therefore the amount of training they required was minimal. So this is all about tailoring it to the needs of the individual, and it comes back to that point about equality and diversity and making sure that we don't put people off simply because their IT skills are not as well developed, say, as some, or they've got a limited understanding of planning, licensing, and so on. So this is all about tailoring the training to the needs of the individual. And the other thing about the e-learning is it's not exclusively e-learning. What WLGA are doing is developing these generic platforms so that there's a consistent message across Wales in terms of some of the more strategic elements of the role. But they acknowledge that there'll be a specific learning requirement or training need at a local level. So these are just the general modules that you can access just to give you a bit of background information. And there'll still be a requirement to deliver localized training, specifically in terms of well, within the council, who you need to contact about, specific services and specific issues. Also with code of conduct training, whilst we might have, some common slides, you might feel that that's better, delivered by way of personal workshops in Newport, which is what we've done traditionally. I've delivered these workshops with the deputy monitoring officer because we find that face-to-face training is easier for members than, say, remote training. So you're not being dictated to that every piece of training that you undertake following the election would have to be delivered online and be impersonal. We can follow this up with localized training if that's your preference, and that can be face-to-face in the council chamber if that's what you would prefer.
I think that's very reassuring, Gareth. Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, and I appreciate that. The only issue I have now is we need to, I think, general consensus is we need to feed back to people like the WLGA, because if I'm given a list of 37 things, then the likelihood is I'll want to try and do as many of them as I can. So, I mean, even if we halved it and divided by 2, it'd still be too many. And I just hope that we can actually say, whoa, we won't be the only council who looks at this across Wales and thinks, it's an obscene amount of information there. And I'm reassured that other members feel the same. I'm reassured by what Gareth has said, but I do feel somehow we need to feed back to the WLGA our thoughts on this matter.
Yeah. What's the consensus on that? Should we sort of feedback that we think it's well, what can you say, over-engineered?
So, I mean, just to come back on that point, Chair, what the WLGA are trying to do is have a comprehensive training programme for what every member is likely to want to know. Now, I think that needs to be read in conjunction with some of those role descriptors. Because if you're not on planning committee, for example, you wouldn't need to undertake planning training. If you're not on democratic services committee, then maybe you don't need an understanding of how that process works, or scrutiny committee, for example. So I think there's a danger of almost throwing the baby out with the bathwater there in terms of telling the WLGA to cut down on the amount of training that's available, because there may be some members that want that training. So I think the message is to councillors, don't feel you have to undertake all of these modules. It's not compulsory, it's not mandatory. You need to be selective in terms of the particular training that you need in terms of the role that you're discharging on the council. So I'd be loath to try and sort of cut this down, because there may be something there that a new member might require.
Yeah. Sorry, Chair, can I just come back on that? In section A here, there are 37 suggested modules relevant to all councillors. That's just in the first section. And I reiterate, 37 modules relevant to all councillors is too much if you don't have to undertake them. That's just in the first part, without the specialist knowledge in the second.
Yes, Kate, hang on. Right.
Just to come,
Kate, I think now, Chris, you're done, yeah? Trevor, I think you come in first, didn't you? Yeah?
I'll have another go if you want. But,
Oh,
No, hang on, we'll go with Kate, because we'll go with Kate then. Here we go. Go on, and Kate.
No, just to say is we all know that this is a very demanding job. The more time we spend doing it, the more we get into it, the more we should recognise there will be areas which we might have been complacent about, but we know that we might have done a better job for our constituents if we'd had that bit more information. This enables us, I really wish this had been available when I was first elected, because when I think back, the amount of stuff, I'm still learning bits and pieces that I hadn't, a new problem which hasn't come across, my desk before, and
Sorry, Kate, you're gone again. Sorry, Kate. Sorry, Kate. No.
I'm just gone there, but if you can hear me, I would just like to say, I think one advantage of the online stuff is people can think if they realise that they haven't got it on some particular area of their work, they can go back and access that e-learning at that time.
Missed most of that, Kate, but I think you were saying that it's an ongoing job and it's all
Yeah.
a tune-in learning process, yeah?
Yeah, and I'm sure we would all hold our hands up to perhaps not having full information about a certain process that would have been useful to people. And, we might say to ourselves, well, if I'd known that 5 years ago, I could have given that piece of advice to that constituent. But the point is, with these, I hate all the online stuff, right? Here's me saying I hate the online stuff, and it keeps on cutting me out.
Right.
But it's gonna be there as a resource.
Right. Thanks.
This is so frustrating, Chair.
I know, drives you mad, dear. There we are. Let's see. I think I got Trevor, Chris, and then Mark. Is that correct?
no, not me.
Right, you're out of the picture, Trevor. All right then. Chris, you wanted to come in on something? And your mic's on, Chris.
I know. I was just doing it. I was in the middle of typing something.
All right.
So I'm on now. You're enthusiastic there.
Oh, there we are.
You're questioning my IT needs there now, Charles.
Yeah.
I think feeding back something like I was just typing something there. We understand the need for mandatory training, like in semi-judicial roles, planning, licensing, etc. However, we would like to underline the need for training to be tailored to individual needs. We also feel consideration should be given to those who are not full-time councillors in terms of time, and indeed we're only paid on we're only getting allowance on the basis of a number of hours that we actually work. We also suggest that the modules be refined or grouped into digestible segments. That's perhaps what I would feedback following on from, or something similar to that, following on from some of the points raised, least of all by Matthew.
Right. Mark, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think the word is focused, really. I think it just needs to be fairly focused.
No, see, that's good, Mark.
For people.
Yeah.
And I do take Gareth's point, though. It's important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. When I was elected first at a by-election, so I didn't even have the advantage of that was 20 years ago this year, actually. But I didn't even have the sort of advantage of having. I mean, when the whole council's elected, you sort of have these induction sessions and so on. So there were no induction sessions. So I came in, and it was a more complicated structure in those days. And if, for example, you wanted to raise something on a particular issue that a constituent had raised with you, it was not obvious where you went. I mean, that's just to give you one example. He was sort of thrown in at the deep end. So I think it's important to remember that the WLGA, having sort of sat in WLGA groups and held positions in the WLGA, that they are there to try and help councillors. They're not there to hinder them, and they play a part in cooperating with partners like Welsh Government and obviously us as councillors in trying to produce helpful guidance, but also support. So I really do think this is there to support new members, but I think, as some members have said, a constructively sort of critical approach, just arguing in favour of greater focusing, is probably the way forward.
Right, thanks. Any more observations?
Yeah, if I could just come in on this. I've taken on board what Chris said and Mark said, and Matthew to a certain extent. Differentiation between mandatory and elective training, I think, is particularly important to get into our answer. And something that's always bugged me long before I became a councillor is qualitative and quantitative training. There's far too much qualitative training, and I have taken this up with officers in other forums where you can just sit in front of the screen for the requisite amount of time. You don't even have to do that now. You just switch the screen on, mute your cameras, and nobody knows whether you're doing anything anyway. But we don't have enough quantifiable training. In other words, that there's some sort of questions, some sort of exam at the end of it, if you'd like to put it crudely, because all the time, certainly for the last 20, 25 years of my work life, I was always sending people on courses and never being quite sure that I was getting any advantage from sending them there, because they didn't seem to absorb an awful lot. And the biggest problem with any form of training is if you don't actually apply it virtually instantly. I think they've done the studies, and they suggest that if you do a training course, after a fortnight, you've forgotten probably 50% of it. And after 6 months, unless you've used it, you've forgotten 80 to 90% of it. You're just clinging on to a very small piece of knowledge. And none of this training should take away from our duty to refer questions to the proper authorities, which are the officers of the council, and getting the answers back from them. It's a non-political statement. Our officers should be answering our questions, not us making up the answers. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, very good point. I'm always mindful of an observation made by a primary school teacher that if the kid comes out of a lesson knowing 3 things that they didn't know at the start of the lesson, then that's a success. And I think that rule of thumb works with councillors as well. But there we are. I think that more or less kicks it to death, doesn't it, Mr. Price?
Yeah, we're happy to feedback those comments to WLGA. The only other thing I would say is that this isn't prescriptive, and at the end of the day, the council can develop its own induction programme as to what you think is the priority for those first few weeks. So this isn't WLGA sort of dictating to you as a council, this is what you must deliver in those sorts of timescales. You may have a different priority. So if members have got any feedback in terms of how we deliver this locally, what's important to you for the first few weeks, and whether you would prefer that by way of e-learning or face-to-face workshops, we'd be happy to receive that feedback. Then we can tailor this not just to the individual, but to the particular needs of Newport Council.
Correct me if I'm wrong, that the face-to-face treatment where we get experts in, that's very expensive, isn't it?
Oh no, we don't. We do sometimes for planning and licensing, but I mean that's not for you to worry about. I mean we'll pay for that from training and development budgets. But for the most part, a lot of the training is delivered internally by council officers. Yeah. I mean certainly code of conduct training and governance training, we would deliver that ourselves. There's an element of scrutiny training that we would deliver ourselves. So, that there are no cost implications, that we're not doing this online to make cost savings, far from it. The only other advantage is something Councillor Thomas mentioned was that with online modules, you can always go back later on and have and as a refresher, because training and development is a continuing process. It's not just a one-off process. So that's the advantage of having something online that you can go back and revisit later just to refresh your memory. But there's no additional cost to most of the face-to-face training other than licensing and planning, where we do tend to get specialists in to deliver that because it is of a specialist nature. But that's covered from training budgets anyway, so that's not an issue.
I'm glad it's not a factor in the debate. Right, next thing is, well, developing a democracy handbook. That item 6.
Yeah, that's just for information, Chair.
Yeah.
I know you're going to this meeting to discuss this. It's another WLGA initiative, and again, it's more for new members. What they're trying to develop is a workbook, if you like, or guide for councillors in terms of how local government works in terms of internal governance arrangements. So that's really just for information, and whether you had any comments to feedback through yourself to those meetings. I mean, a couple of comments I know I've raised with you about this governance handbook. I mean, firstly, councils operate in different ways.
Yeah.
You know, the internal decision making in structure in Newport is different to Cardiff and other councils, for example. We've got different schemes of delegations, different ways of taking decisions. So any sort of all Wales governance handbook will be at a sort of very high level, I would have thought. And it probably needs to be supplemented by something at a local level. So that's the first thing. Secondly, and it comes back to the legislation again, there's a requirement in the legislation to actually produce a summary guide to the Constitution. Now, given how many pages our Constitution runs to, how we're going to summarise that in a few pages, I'm not really sure. But again, the question I would raise is how this governance handbook sort of fits in with that requirement for a summary of each council's constitution. But those are my observations. I think generally, it's helpful for councillors to have a simplistic guide, if you like, to how internal governance works within councils, but with that caveat that every council's decision-making processes are different.
I believe our constitution runs to about 1,000 pages, or something mammoth like that, isn't it?
Well, if anyone has read it from cover to cover, yes, it's well over sort of 1,000 pages. And it will need substantial revision. I know it's a task that's on your work programme, and you've looked at it on a piecemeal basis. But yeah, that's one of the things, one of the reasons that requirement was introduced in the legislation. You know, it's almost indecipherable for most people. What they want is a summary guide, really, as to how the internal governance works. But that's going to be a challenge in itself, actually producing that.
Gosh, so much for be a councillor. It'll only take up one afternoon a week, eh? There we go. So right, so I think that's for guidance over. That's for another day. So I think that was more or less it, wasn't it? Apart from these appendices, but those are dealt with under the previous item. I think we're more or less done, aren't we?
Well, there's your draft work programme there, Chair, which I think we probably touched on previously. This was sort of covered as part of the annual report that we presented to council back in November, I think. So there's a draft work programme there for you, but I think we've touched on that. Broadly, a work programme, I think, for the next 12 months will involve responding to the Local Government and Elections Act. And as soon as we've got the guidance there, looking at what we need to do in preparation for that. We've talked about standing orders and public participation and petitions. So that's obviously something we will need to look at. We've touched on remote meetings, and I know members have got differing views on that. What the legislation requires is not what you've got now, which is all remote meetings. What the legislation covers is the so-called hybrid meetings, where if one or two councillors need to dial in remotely, they can. So it's not a matter of choice. We have to provide the technology for members to do that. Whether they have to travel 50 miles in Powys, or whether it's simply the fact that because of work commitments or childcare commitments, they would rather sort of dial in remotely than travel into the Civic Centre on a Tuesday evening. So we're looking at that that technology. We're developing that now. It's slightly different to all the entirely remote systems that you've got now. So we are looking at adaptations to the council chamber and the meeting rooms in the Civic Centre, because obviously if a large number of people are sat in that room, you all need to be able to see the councillors who are dialing in remotely. We know it doesn't work if you're all sat there in front of your laptops, because you will lose connection completely. So this hybrid technology is something that we will need to develop. And on that front, I've sort of mentioned in one of the reports that we have made a bid to this Digital Democracy Fund now. Welsh Government have set aside about £500,000 across Wales to assist councils in terms of preparing for implementation of the local government legislation. So we've put in a bid, I mentioned in the report, of £52,000, because that will be the cost of actually developing the software and upgrading the kit then in the council chamber and the committee rooms to comply with the legislation. So hopefully we'll get some grant money for Welsh Government. So that's already ongoing. And as that develops, I think it's something that we will want to bring back to Democratic Services Committee, so you can be satisfied how the technology will work. So that's on the work programme as well.
Yeah, all interesting stuff. Right.
Chair, on that, I don't know that the technology can be made to work. It's the protocols that go alongside it that are more difficult to establish. In other words, who's going to get priority? Is the dialing in council going to get priority? Are the councillors in the room going to get priority? Are we going to have the outside councillor making a statement without a possible question against it? You know, that's the sort of difficulty I envisage. As I say, certainly not the technology.
Yeah.
So just to come back on that, Chair, there is no priority. What the technology will have to deliver is the a process whereby councillors dialing in remotely are able to participate fully in the meeting as if they were in the face-to-face meeting. So you can't be disadvantaged in any way, whether in terms of speaking, voting, or tabling motions, asking questions. It has to work in the same way. So that's why we are looking at this technology now, to make sure that members who are dialing in are not disadvantaged in any way. And the key thing for us, obviously, is in terms of voting. That what we can't have is the technology going down when those remote councillors are about to participate in a vote. So all of these issues need to be addressed to make sure that people are not disadvantaged if they are dialing in remotely.
If there was a glitch and a councillor couldn't vote, could they then subsequently sort of cry foul and say that vote's not valid?
This is something you would need to look at in terms of your protocols and standing orders for these sort of hybrid meetings. But again, that will come down to confidence in the technology. Because if 50 councillors are not dialing in remotely, if it's just one or two, then the broadband connection shouldn't be an issue. But this is something we need to trial now in the next sort of 12 months leading up to the elections. Okay,
Kate first, and then I think Trevor. Yeah.
Gareth, you know, you've just seen what's happened to me twice this morning, at least twice this morning. You know, this has happened to me in other meetings. I'm with EE. It's not some sort of unknown company. I don't know why it does it, but if anybody on the technical side has any advice that they could give me, you know, because otherwise, I mean, you know, it's really difficult to feel that this is working at all when I keep on freezing. You know, I can't hear what others are saying and they can't hear me. So, you know, we have these, you know, we don't need to be a 50-mile round trip away in West Wales. You know, it's happening when I'm 1 mile from the Civic Centre. So, thank you.
Just to say, Chair, if members experience that sort of difficulty with their connection breaking up, let Democratic Services know. We'll take it up with IT and SRS. It may be a whole broadband. So we will need to investigate that properly. It shouldn't be the software, and it shouldn't be the council devices. But if there is an issue, report it to Democratic Services, and they'll get in touch with IT and SRS, and they will look into that for you. I mean, if there is an issue with your broadband, I know the chair previously had issues with his home broadband. Again, we can look into that for you. But you're quite right. These systems only work properly if you've got a reliable IT platform.
Yeah, I thought mine was, and this is supposed to be fast broadband we've got here, but it's really not. So thank you very much for that advice. I will contact them about it. Thank you.
I got Trevor and then I got Chris.
Yeah, just a comment really, Chair. And I was watching Holyrood, Scottish Parliament, and they were having tremendous amount of problems at the last parliamentary meeting in regards to people dialing in, voting, and it was a mess, and it needs to be sorted out. The same as our hands thing here. It's been going on now for months and months. It should be sorted out by now. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, it's just a common question, really. I think, one of the things that we do need to consider as a council, based on the feedback and even Kate's experience today, is, as we give new members a laptop and an iPad and, a pen and paper, whatever else, I think part of that procedure should be, the fact that for the term of office, the council does pay for a broadband connection, regardless of whether there's one existing or not, because as we all know, there are different types of broadband. I get offers seems like every 2 minutes from the company that I subscribe to for super fast, super fast, fiber optic, There are different degrees in the packages that are offered by the private sector. So I think we should really think as part of that package that a broadband equal to everybody is paid for by the council. In order, you could have new members coming forward that don't have broadband, for example, and I think that should be part of the procedure. Now, I don't know where we feed that back to, but I think that's definitely something that we should consider. Because it's all very well good somebody giving somebody a device, but if they haven't got adequate broadband at home, then they're not going to be able to connect properly, are they? And why should one councillor have super fast, fiber optic, whatever else, and another councillor almost have perhaps a dial-in service, Just something to think of. I know business are thinking of that as remote working becomes more and more, the goodwill of somebody sat in their kitchen working away, that dividend is decreasing, and people are beginning to realise, well, you're using your own electric, your own broadband, your own, I think as part of the process, councillors, it would be very sensible to pay for that broadband connection during the term of office.
Right, I've got Mark next.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I noticed that Chris broke up in that. I just wondered whether it was a rhetorical breakup, to reinforce his point.
I timed it perfectly.
That was not really my point. My point was that in the courts, the way they do it, because we work in the same, which Gareth will tell you that it's in a similar way, but certainly in the employment tribunal, they give you a number to ring, so that if the thing breaks up, you can continue on the phone until the internet becomes properly available again. So that it's not a brilliant way of doing it, but it's better than not participating at all. And it is a reasonably sort of adequate way to go about it. Just a thought.
Right. Pardon me, I hope I haven't done this wrong again. I noticed that, was it Neil was supposed to introduce that instead of your good self, Gareth?
I don't think Neil's going to be offended, Chair.
No, apologies, Neil. That's twice I've done that now. It's certainly nothing personal. I do apologise. Never mind.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank God for that. Right.
Just to come back on Councillor Chris Evans's point about members broadband, and just to explain the position. Years ago, we used to pay for broadband for members. But then what we found was members had two lines going in because they already had their home broadband. Effectively, it was duplicating the cost because it wasn't at anything, and most members could connect in for their council business at no additional cost. So that was always the assumption. Now, if members either don't have broadband, you know, or it would cost them to upgrade simply because of their council business, that is something that we can look at, because you are quite right. Under the IRP proposals, members should not have to pay for the cost of their own IT support.
Yeah,
But for most members, their home broadband and what they pay privately is more than sufficient for them to do for carry out their council business at no additional cost. But it's something we can look at. If there really is an issue with members' home broadband, then we can have a look at that. And members shouldn't be out of pocket by paying for extra speed or extra capacity on their broadband just to undertake their council business.
My suggestion is, in order for a level playing field, that every councillor should have their home broadband paid for at a particular level.
Yeah, but I mean, the problem with that is there's an element of home usage in that as well. I mean, this was the difficulty last time.
I think we should just accept that. But it's the same as there's an element of private uses, perhaps with your laptop. So you could be watching Netflix on your laptop, you know, as well as doing council work. You know, you can't legislate for that. It's become an essential tool. And, you know, we're asking people to do online training that might take however much time, etc., etc. So I think it should be a allowance. Only a thought. I'm not overly. I've become passionate about it now, Gareth. It was merely a thought, but I do think that, you know, if you're that perhaps we should think about, when we look at things in the round, incorporating that into the use your laptop, and by the way, who's your provider? It's costing 50 quid a month. It should be paid for, I think.
Well, like I said, that was done in the past. It was decided at the time that it was an unnecessary expense because most members had private broadband that was more than adequate for that purpose. I mean, it could be revisited, don't get me wrong. But like I said, at the moment, the rule is that we don't automatically pay for broadband unless either members don't have broadband or their current home broadband is insufficient for council business, and then we can look at it.
If you're opening that particular game, can we have a look at members getting their emails onto their personal phones? We used to have it up until a couple of years ago, and now that's been taken away from us. I understand that it goes directly to council phones, which is fine. But for most of us members, you've got your phone with you most of the time, so you're picking up your emails that way, and then you go into your iPad or your laptop at specific times of the day.
Again, Chair, if members have got any issues about their IT support, we can pick those up with IT. You know, I have to with the bring your own device issue. There were security issues in terms of the information, in terms of secure networks and so on, and that's why, you know, we haven't sort of encouraged members to use their own phones. It's why members are issued with laptops and iPads as well, because of the secure council network. But if members want IT to look at that, then we can ask Mark Blizzard and on the IT team to look at that.
If you would, please, that'd be I'd be most grateful.
Right, any more? I've got Trevor. There's something that says Watkins Trevor elected member, and then there's 3 little shining dots. Did you want to say anything, or no? There must be gremlins in the machine, I should imagine. I think we're all done. Yeah, all done. Lovely, lovely. So that just leaves us the forward work programme, doesn't it? Yeah. Oh, wait a minute.
We've done that, Chair.
We've done that.
We've done that, Chair.
Then we're all done, more or less, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Trevor, you're on mute.
Do we wait for a date for the next meeting?
Agenda.
Hang on, there is one, isn't there?
April.
April what, 29th?
Yes, Chair.
That's it. And 29th of April, really? I thought it was not Monday the 26th.
No.
So it's definitely 29th. Okay, lovely. Same time.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Okay.
Well, thank you all for attending. I think we've given it all a fair thrash this morning, haven't we, when all said and done?
They're actually really good, Chair. Well done, thank you.
Oh, well, there we are. What great company you've been. All the very best, and there we are. So,
Great company.
there we are.
Thank you, Chair.
I don't know if I can come up with a cat face mask, but here we are.
What are you doing now?
Hang on.
Oh, no.
Wait for it, it'll be a replica of the ship.
Yeah, we might want to end the broadcast, Anne, before he
Yeah.
comes.
Here we are.
Please
He's
stop
been,
recording.